everyone, and welcome to another episode of HouseplanTEA Ranty. And if you are new here and are not familiar with this series, this is basically a series where I go on a bit of a rant about things that are driving me crazy related to houseplants and the houseplant community or the houseplant industry or anything of that nature. But just a quick little disclaimer to start things off, these are merely my opinions on things. I do try to back up the things that I am stating with facts where possible. If you have different opinions than me, that is 100% okay. If you want to have a polite conversation about it, feel free to comment down below. But we like to keep things nice over here. We like to have civil debates, as it were, and that is totally acceptable. But just remember, these are merely my opinions. You can take what you want from it. If it's not your opinion, once again, that is 100% a-okay. But today, you guys, we're going to be talking about plant names, plant labeling, and just some terms that are being used to describe plants in the current houseplant community, because there are some things going on that are driving me crazy. They're causing lots of confusion, and I don't care if you're new to the houseplant community or you've been here for years, they're causing confusion for everyone, and I really just wish they would stop. And I kind of got started down this whole ranty rabbit hole for this video last week when I was laying in bed and I was flipping through my Instagram stories feed one night, and I came across a story that was posted by planTEA. And I had to immediately stop, press my finger to the screen to stop the story from advancing forward, and did a double take to make sure I was seeing what I actually was seeing. And turns out I was actually seeing what I was actually seeing. And I do want to state up front, you guys, I absolutely love planTEA. I think Amanda at planTEA is freaking hilarious. I have no ill will or hard feelings towards planTEA, and I am not throwing any shade, because at the end of the day, what I'm about to show you is probably something that started with the grower where they were buying their plants from. It's probably not something that anybody at planTEA did of their own volition. They were probably just passed information on this plant down the line from the grower, and they just went with what the grower said. But let's go ahead and set this up for you. So I'm not going to show you the actual story post yet, but I am going to show you a picture of the plant that was featured in the story, and this picture is coming directly from their website. So here is what the plant looks like. Now, if you've been here for a while, or even if you're relatively new, if you've seen my most recent full houseplant tour video, you would know that this plant looks very much like a plant that I own, and the plant that I own is this plant, which is a Tenanthe luberciana. Now, looking at these, I personally think it's obvious that the planTEA plant is a Tenanthe luberciana. Once again, if you disagree with me, feel free to comment down below and let me know. Now, there is another plant that I need to show you in order for you to fully understand why I was so shocked when I saw the story I'm about to show you. This plant is what is known as a Calathea yellow fusion, and I had mentioned to you guys back in the summer that we had started to see these popping up on the market last year, and it was kind of interesting because before the yellow fusion we had the white fusion, and this is basically the white fusion just with yellow instead of white. Now, I, once again, personally don't think that this Calathea yellow fusion looks anything like the Tenanthe luberciana. I think they are very distinctly different, which is why when I saw this story on planTEA's Instagram, I was highly shocked and highly confused. And me being me, I had to dig deeper. So at first, you guys, I thought maybe this was just like a gaffe on somebody's part over at planTEA. They accidentally put the wrong plant name on the story, or they accidentally put the wrong picture. They meant to put a yellow fusion picture there with that name. But then I went to their website to see if I could find the plant, and lo and behold, on their website, it was a picture of this plant labeled as a Calathea yellow fusion. At this point, I was just at a loss. I was really confused. So once again, I just kept digging further. planTEA is pretty good about taking the common name for a plant and then putting below it the scientific name on their website. So I clicked into that picture, took a look, and sure enough, the label for this plant on their site is not what you would expect it to be for a Calathea white fusion, Calathea yellow fusion. Calathea yellow fusion and actually Calathea white fusion are this scientific name. I'm not sure how to pronounce the second part of it. And just a reminder, you guys, Calatheas have been reclassified as Gopertias, but it's been relatively recent, and all the plant tags pretty much still say Calathea. So until everybody starts relabeling plants correctly as Gopertia, I'm still going to refer to them as Calathea, because if I don't, you guys are going to get confused when you go shopping and you don't see Gopertia on any tags anywhere. But just make a mental note. Calathea, now Gopertia. But I digress. So this was not the scientific name that they had listed on their site. The scientific name they had listed on their site was Calathea pilosa variegata. So immediately I pulled up the Kew Gardens naming database, Kew Botanical Gardens. If you guys aren't aware, this is considered one of the best sources to find out if names of plants are true accepted species or not. And I will link a link to their website in the description down below for you. I highly recommend you bookmark it. It comes in very handy when you're trying to figure out naming issues with plants. So I went over there and I plugged in Calathea pilosa. I did not include the variegata because most naming databases like that don't recognize all the different little, cultivars and varieties down the line. So I just plugged in Calathea pilosa and up it popped. And sure enough, it is not an accepted species in botanical society, as it were. It is, however, a synonym for a different plant. So I clicked on it to see what it was a synonym for, and wouldn't you know it, up popped a Tenanthe. And this to me looks very much like a non-variegated form of my Tenanthe luberciana. Now technically this is scientifically called a Tenanthe compressa, but once again it is definitely not a Calathea, it is definitely not a Gopertia. And yeah, so my suspicions were pretty much confirmed that in fact I think this is truly a Tenanthe luberciana that has for some reason been mislabeled as a Calathea yellow fusion or a Calathea pilosa. And I don't have any clue as to why or how this has happened. Once again, I think probably a grower somewhere down the line said this is what the name of this plant is. It got passed through all of the people in between there and the person in charge of the planTEA website, and it got labeled that way. But once again, you guys, this kind of thing drives me crazy. It causes so much confusion. And I do want to be clear up front that all of the naming confusion that we're going to be talking about today, for the most part, with the exception of this one we just looked at, is going to be centered around common names and not scientific names. Scientific names for plants have been changing a lot lately too, but as I've explained to you guys before, there is verifiable reasoning and proof for why they are changing the names, why they are moving plants from one genus to another related to DNA evidence and things like that. So I'm not talking about the craziness with plants moving genuses or anything like that. We are really talking mostly about common plant names and labeling today. But after I went down this rabbit hole with this plant, since I was already on planTEA's site and I hadn't been on there in a while, I decided to just kind of scroll through and see what they had, if they had any new exciting plants or anything. And that's when I made my next discovery, which is this plant. So I don't know what you think this plant looks like, but I think this plant looks an awful lot like a Calathea white fusion. So here is my Calathea white fusion. Yes, this plant looks a little bit taller, but I don't know about the age difference between this plant and my plant. There's all kinds of things that could cause differences in height and everything. But overall, this looks very much like a Calathea white fusion to me. However, it is labeled as a Calathea stella, which is clearly a common name. Once again, when you go in, you get this scientific name, which is what a white fusion is. So then I was really confused. So of course I headed over to Google to try to figure this out. And in that process, I came across something known as a Calathea white tiger, which also looks very much like a Calathea white fusion. At this point, I was like, what the hell is going on? What is happening here? Are people just making up new names for the same plant? I mean, I'm pretty sure the white fusion is still patented as well. And so I was like, okay, well, let me go check on the patent. Still patented, you guys, definitely still patented. So I was like, are people just trying to get away with it by calling it something else and acting like they created a new variety? Did they actually create a new variety that's slightly different, but not enough for anybody to really tell visually and give it a new name? What is happening here? And I tried to find out, you guys, but honestly, I couldn't find much of anything. I did find one site, and I think it's just a basic blog site, that suggested that the Calathea stella is a different cultivar of the white fusion. So technically they're claiming it's a different plant that is supposedly hardier and has a longer shelf life, I believe are the words that they used, which is, I don't know why you would refer to a plant as having a shelf life. Its shelf life is really dependent on your care and the environment and conditions that you give the plant. So that was also weird wording, at least in my opinion. But yeah, I was just like, okay. So really, it sounds like these are maybe, scientifically I couldn't find anything verifiable, but maybe these are slightly different cultivars of the white fusion. I'm not sure how they're getting away with that because a patent usually requires something to be drastically different. And I don't think this is drastically different enough than the white fusion to not be breaking patent law, but I'm not a patent lawyer. But if these aren't new cultivars and people are just slapping a different name on an existing plant, talk about confusing. Like, people are gonna think, oh, it's a completely different plant. Oh, maybe I wanna go get that. I like my white fusion. I'm gonna get this Stella too. And it's the same freaking plant. Once again, I could not prove whether it was or it wasn't, but these are the kinds of things that I am starting to see more and more, and it is driving me up the freaking wall. And I know I'm using plantarina as an example, you guys, because that's just the one that I happened across, but it's not just plantarina. I am seeing this across the board all over the place. And I do want to take a moment to say that I do understand that names can vary by country. Drastically, if we're talking about Hawaii, which is actually the same country that I live in, but they use their native language for naming plants. So even when you go through their botanical gardens, it might say, oh, here's some calatheas, in a section together, but each individual one is named with the Hawaiian name of the plant, not like the terms that we use here in the mainland for the plant. And you see that kind of thing in other countries. You also might see slight variations. Like I've heard people say in Australia, my plant that is a pearls and jade pothos, I believe is referred to as a snow queen in Australia, whereas snow queen here refers to the marble queen. And that's another one that's kind of been confusing me too, you guys. I always thought it was a different variety of marble queen that was more white, but I'm starting to think it's just another name for marble queen. So yes, names can vary slightly between countries, but we shouldn't be seeing a lot of this like stuff that I'm describing today. And so let's move on to the next thing that was driving me crazy. And that is when we actually do, just for some reason, unknown to anybody, just decide to change the name of a plant. And that is happening more and more today. Once again, I have not been able to figure out, especially this example I'm about to give you, why. I had hunches, couldn't figure it out, try as I might, but Syngonium jade is the one I'm going to use it as an example. So Syngonium jade has been around for a while. It has always been referred to as Syngonium jade. Then all of a sudden, a while back, a new name started floating around there for Syngoniums called Syngonium 3 Kings. Well, looking at Syngonium 3 Kings and looking at Syngonium jade, it was hard to tell the difference, but a lot of people were thinking these were two different types of Syngoniums that just looked really similar. Turns out, you guys, exact same plant. Exact same plant. I don't know where or why the name 3 Kings came up, but apparently it is becoming the more accepted name for this plant now, and I'm saying that because Steve's Leaves, who has sold Syngonium jades forever, they recently renamed the plant on their site to Syngonium 3 Kings. So if they're renaming Syngonium jade to 3 Kings on their site, that's a pretty good sign to me that 3 Kings is becoming the accepted new name for Syngonium jade. Now, they did put in parentheses on their site, aka Syngonium jade, but the fact that they felt the need to change it to 3 Kings, I guess we have all just apparently decided that it's now going to be Syngonium 3 Kings. Why? I don't know. I can't tell you. But this is the kind of thing, once again, that is driving me crazy. It is so hard to keep things straight nowadays. And I just feel like sometimes it happens because it's like a ploy to sell more plants. Like, let's give it a different name and then people think it looks cute and they'll not recognize that it's actually a jade and they'll buy it even though they already have a jade. I don't know. That may not be actually what's happening, but it is causing that kind of activity with people because they think it's a different plant when it's not. So once again, this is why I had to rant today. This is just, it's too much, you guys. It's too much. But even worse is the issue of trademark names for plants. So let's talk about that next. And just to be clear, you guys, I'm talking about trademarked plant names, not patents for plants. Let's take a second and kind of delve into the difference between the two. So when we're talking about plant patents, when somebody creates a new variety or a new cultivar or discovers a new plant or whatever, and they start producing it and selling it, they can apply for a patent on that plant, and that gives them 20 years of exclusive rights to produce and sell that plant. If somebody else wants to produce and sell that plant, they have to get express permission from the owner of the patent. And lots of times this actually is done, where they will give a different grower permission to propagate and sell the plant, but for a fee or a percentage of the sales that grower is going to make off of that plant. But after 20 years, all bets are off. Anybody can propagate and sell that plant if they want. You cannot repatent a plant after 20 years. It just becomes public domain, which is why a lot of growers have started to trademark plant names, because trademarks on a plant name can be renewed in perpetuity forever. You can own a trademark on a plant name as long as you remember to renew the trademark and you don't let it lapse. You can own the rights to that name for like all time, right? And so this was kind of like a way for them to get around the fact that after 20 years, other people could produce and sell their plant, because now we have situations such as, well, let's talk about the pearls and jade pothos again, why don't we? That is an Epipremnum aureum pearls and jade. The name pearls and jade is a trademark. That plant is actually still under patent, and you guys can look up patented plants yourself. I'll put a link below in the description for you. However, good luck, because most of them are not patented under the trademarked name, because if they were, that name would not be trademarkable later on when that patent expired, if that makes sense. So for example, let me check my notes because I wrote down what the name on the patent for the pearls and jade pothos is, and it's like letters and numbers. So I just want to make sure that I say it correctly to you guys. Okay, so on the patent for the pearls and jade pothos, it is labeled as Epipremnum UFM12. So if you went to the patent site and you searched pearls and jade, you're not going to find anything. You would have to search UFM12, preferably Epipremnum UFM12. So that is the name on the patent. They went then and came up with the name pearls and jade because obviously it sounds better, right? It's more memorable. Came up with that name and they trademarked that name. So basically what happens is on August 17th of 2030, if I wanted to start propagating and selling my pearls and jade pothos, I could. Nobody could say I'm breaking patent law because it's free public domain at that point. However, I cannot sell it as a pearls and jade pothos or an Epipremnum pearls and jade. And if that grower was smart, they probably also trademarked jade and pearls and jade in apostrophe pearls. Like they probably did every kind of like rearranging of that name that you could think of and trademarked it so that you couldn't even like get close to calling it that. And so the reason for doing that, you guys, is they have now established over a 20-year period a common name that everybody knows that plant by. Everybody knows it as a pearls and jade pothos. If you go out there and you try to sell it as something else, labeled as something else, people are probably going to be like, oh, well, I thought that was a pearls and jade pothos, but clearly it's not, and I really want a pearls and jade pothos. So they're going to hunt down a plant that says it's a pearls and jade pothos, and because that grower has the trademark on that name, the plant that they're going to end up buying is going to be one from that grower unless somebody is breaking trademark law, in which case that grower is probably going to go after them. So that is why they do these trademark names. It kind of helps them maintain, you know, rights and sort of a monopoly over the plant when the patent expires. But now the problem is everybody who does want to propagate and sell that plant because the patent has expired on it and they can legally do so, have to come up with another name for it. So that's how we end up sometimes with two plants that are the exact same plant on the market, but it's being called pearls and jade pothos over here, and it's being called white and green variegated small leaf pothos, or whatever people are going to decide to call it over here. And that once again creates confusion. I really, really wish there was like some kind of regulation to stop this kind of thing. I mean, it's just insane. You guys, you can't even like call it something else like Steve's Leaves did when they said it's a Three Kings Syngonium and they put AKA jade syngonium in parentheses. You can't even do that. You can't put pearls and jade anywhere on anything when the patent expires on this plant if you're trying to propagate and sell it. So once again, causing all kinds of confusion for people. You guys, Toby has come to join us, so you may hear a little bit of purring going on and you might get a little fluffy tail walking across the screen here in a bit. But let's move on to plant tags and labels that are actually stuck like on plant pots, because I have talked in the past before about how crazy it drives me when growers put the most generic tags on plants. So I'm talking like assorted Hoyas. That's great, but I'd really like to know exactly what kind of Hoya it is, not just assorted Hoya. And the worst is like when they put assorted tropical plants on a plant tag, because I mean, geez, you might as well just slap the tag that says plant on the plant, if you know what I mean. And honestly, you guys, I don't understand why this is happening. If it is the grower that's doing it, then it almost seems like sheer laziness. But I have a suspicion that somebody further down the line is the one applying the tag, and maybe the plants they're getting from the grower, they don't know what they are because the grower chose not to label them, in which case, you know, I guess maybe the grower is being a little bit lazy. But the reason I think this is happening is because I saw this the other day on Instagram as well. So this is a local plant shop here, and they had gotten in a new shipment of plants and they didn't know what some of the plants were. So they went to Instagram and posted pictures and asked their followers to help them identify the plants. If you own a plant store and your sole purpose in life is to sell plants to people, and you have to go ask people like me who might be coming to buy plants from you what a plant is, that does not exactly scream like you should be confident in us as a plant seller, if you know what I mean. Now, I don't want to throw any shade on them. I love them. They have beautiful plants. Oasis Plant Shop is the name of the shop. They are great. But when I saw that, once again, I just got really frustrated and was like, what is going on? And once again, I'm pretty sure it's not their fault. These plants are probably coming to them. You know, they may even be actually ordering them as assortment of philodendron or something like that, and not being able to pick the actual plants, because sometimes growers will sell things that way so that you can get them for cheaper if you're not specifying a specific type. And if they have like overstock on ones, they just grab one, you know, of each type they have overstocked and throw them on a pallet and then send them to you. And if that is what is happening and they aren't actually labeling them, then yeah, maybe they know it's a philodendron, but they don't know what type. Now, once again, I don't know if I would take to Instagram and like advertise that per se, but it's just very frustrating. And I imagine it's frustrating to them too to not know what it is when it comes in. So why isn't there some kind of regulation or law stating that they have to label what the plant is? But honestly, you guys, I don't know if that would work either, because the other thing that is driving me absolutely up the wall is the fact that so many people are still mislabeling plants. Just yesterday, one of you reached out to me who had just gotten into plants and bought a Monstera deliciosa that looks very similar to mine. I know where this person got it, very similar to the type of store that I bought mine at. So I'm sure it looks almost identical. So when they saw this in my video, they said, hey, what's the name of that plant? Because I've been trying to search for the plant based on the plant tag, and I can't figure it out. And the reason they couldn't figure it out is because the plant tag said Philodendron monstera. That's right, Philodendron monstera. And honestly, you guys, guess what? That's what this one was labeled when I bought it as well. So once again, this is not a situation where the genus recently changed. So that's why I said we still see Calathea on the labels at stores for plants that are now Go Persia. They're probably still trying to run through their Calathea labels that they already had printed before they switch over. That is understandable. That being labeled Philodendron monstera, not understandable at all. It is just confusing to people. And I see it more and more. I think I've told you guys, I've seen tons of like schismatoglottis plants, for example. That one's been happening a lot lately, labeled as aglaonemas. I've also seen them labeled as halomenas. Why can I not commit to memory how to say that word, you guys? This word. And so that is just getting very, very frustrating to me. I have seen like Dischidias labeled as Hoyas, which once again, they're in the same family, but they are very different plants, and vice versa. And that kind of thing, there's really no excuse for it. And that's not even a question of, oh, it's called a Dischidia in another country. It's the scientific name, you know, it's the scientific name. People should be able to get the scientific name correct. And if they aren't sure what the scientific name is, or if they're using a synonym of the accepted name, once again, that website I linked below for you is real easy to just go to that, plug in a name, and you'll be able to find out real fast. But right now, it's all just causing mass confusion for people. Now, luckily, a lot of these plants have similar care requirements. So for example, if a schismatoglottis, you bought one and it is mislabeled as an aglaonema, at least the care requirements are almost identical between those two species of plants. But sometimes that might not be the case, and when somebody looks up the plant, now they're going based off of the incorrect name that it was labeled, they're learning the incorrect care requirements, and then they're wondering why the plant's not doing so well. So once again, this is just like stuff that I am seeing happen more and more and more in the houseplant industry and community, and it's just confusing for people. It drives me nuts, and I really wish there was some way for someone to regulate it better. But the last thing I want to talk about, you guys, is placing the label, and I'm not talking about a physical label in this sense, but using a term to describe plants. And those terms that I want to talk about today are the term rare and the term unicorn. These two terms drive me absolutely crazy. Now, rare actually drives me more crazy than unicorn. I'll explain why as we go along. But rare. Rare is relative. It is a relative term, you guys. What might be rare in my country that I never see here and is super hard to get, and you have to hunt it down from somewhere overseas, and who knows if the plant will even survive here, because honestly, that's probably why I don't see it in this country, is because it's not conducive to this environment. That is what would be considered, I guess, rare for me. But if that same plant is just common and grown in abundance and you see it growing everywhere like in Indonesia, well then it's definitely not rare to someone in Indonesia, it's a common plant. In my opinion, the term rare really just needs to be reserved for describing plants in the wild that are perhaps hard to find or maybe even at risk of going extinct. That is what I would call a rare plant. And I don't really think we should necessarily be encouraging people to covet owning those types of plants unless they are being like tissue culture produced somewhere or something like that. But if they're being tissue culture produced, guess what? They're not going to be rare for long. And that's another reason why I just would not use the term rare to describe them in that situation. I think we should just reserve rare for describing scientifically plants in the wild, because it just doesn't really make sense to me to use it in any other regard. If you want to say a plant is hard to find in your area, it's hard to find for you, fine. They're scarce. They're scarce in the US, but they're in abundance in, once again, like Indonesia. Okay, but it's not rare. And we just attach this connotation to rare, meaning it's super valuable too, which once again doesn't make sense because it may cost me like $200 to get this plant I want that I can't find here imported from Indonesia versus somebody in Indonesia just goes to their local store and buys it for the equivalent of like 20 bucks US dollars. You know what I mean? So maybe we need to kind of be careful how we're using that term. But that brings me to the term unicorn. The term unicorn is very similar to the term rare in my mind, with the exception of that I feel like it is sometimes used. For example, I used it in my wish list video that I did for 2023, saying that the plant that was in the #1 spot on my wish list, the Philodendron ilsamanii, was a unicorn plant. I feel comfortable using it for that because that plant honestly is hard for virtually anybody to find. It's expensive for almost everyone. That kind of fits the bill. It's not one of those plants that there will be some price differences, I feel like, from country to country, but it's not drastically different, and it's not like it's super easy to find and everybody owns one in a country over here versus a country over here. To me, that makes more sense to use that term unicorn to describe a plant like that. But honestly, you guys, go on Instagram, plug into the search #unicornplant. You're gonna see things that, I'm sorry, I don't think they're unicorn plants. I own some of those plants. I got them for like 30 bucks. I would hardly use the term unicorn to describe that. So once again, it is relatively a relative term relative to how you personally feel like about a plant. And so yeah, it's starting to annoy me that people are using it a lot. But actually, you guys, it was a Facebook Marketplace post from a girl that I saw the other night requesting people throw at her all their unicorn plants that they had for sale that sent me down another rabbit hole of what the heck is going on over here on Facebook Marketplace. But that's gonna have to wait for our next HouseplanTEA Ranty video. But thanks for coming along on this ranty video, and if you have enjoyed it, please be sure to click that like and or subscribe button down below. And if you have not seen my previous HouseplanTEA Ranty videos, you can check one or both of those out next, right here. Thanks so much for joining me today, you guys, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Aloha!